Hello, I'm Charlotte from Female Elite Wrestling. Welcome to Guts and Laces. I'm glad that you joined us today, and I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to connect in person. I hope that you are able to connect with me at some point in the future, and until then, I look forward to being able to connect by chat during the live version of this presentation. Guts and Laces is a play on words that I hope you can appreciate by the time we finish up. But first, I hope that you leave this session inspired by our rich history and our progress. Inspired by what we call the one courageous girl, that one who shows up, had the guts, laced up her shoes, and just wrestled boys when that was the only opportunity available. And I'll be sharing stories of unprecedented growth and undeniable challenges that affect girls in wrestling in Iowa. Against the odds, wrestling has become one of the fastest growing sports for high school girls, despite being in a country that struggles with issues of gender and risk. When the landscape for women wrestling changed at all levels, beginning in 2016, this most recent Olympic quad, there are lots of layers of detail to that I'd like to share and help you put into perspective for where we are and how we made it here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the changes and challenges that brought me onto my journey back to basics, to focus on physical literacy and health, mental and physical well-being, and safety, to really looking at a future for female wrestling that is focused on the developmental needs, not just of girls, but of women from childhood to their career life and beyond. Our outline for today is pretty straightforward. We'll finish off the welcome section with some background and disclosures and then move on to our three main content areas: wrestling landscape, online resources, and planning. You'll see there's also a more information section that we'll reference periodically throughout the presentation, and I hope you'll reference it more thoroughly on your own. You'll find my contact information at the end, which I hope you'll use in the months and years ahead as you continue your journey as an educator and a leader. Now for background, Female Elite Wrestling is a chartered USA Wrestling Club, and that means that the same national organization that forms our Olympic team also provides educational resources and liability insurance for our coaches, clinics, and competitive events. We provide resources to athletes across the state, and we host practices at the Dan Gable Museum in Waterloo. FEW is a volunteer-run charitable nonprofit, though, based out of Iowa City. I'm also the Iowa USA Wrestling Women's Director. All the statements that I make in this presentation, though, are opinions and perspectives of me as an individual and do not represent the position of USA Wrestling or Iowa USA Wrestling. My experience with sports and movement formally includes a degree in exercise science, degrees in physical therapy, competitive sports experience in gymnastics and track in high school, powerlifting in college, and judo as an adult when my children were competing. My recreational movement experience is a lifetime of dance, high school cheer, college taekwondo, and adult kickboxing, yoga, and tai chi. I coach wrestling even though I was never a wrestler, and my local, regional, national, and international experience has taught me many lessons. I hope to share some of them with you. I coach from the youth through what we'll call the senior or open level. So when you imagine the U.S. Open for other sports, there's often not an age limit to participate. And so when I mention senior or open, I'm referring to that wide open age group. In terms of financial disclosures, all of my volunteer work in wrestling is unpaid positions, and so I don't have any financial interest to report there. I do work as a physical therapist, and I specialize in integrative health and chronic pain. And those roles and that knowledge has really informed how I coach in terms of wrestling, because I not only then teach wrestling technique and agility and conditioning like you might expect, but also mindfulness and mind-body awareness. The national landscape for wrestling actually looks like this up until very recently. So while USA Wrestling had been organizing and leading world championship teams since they were first started in 1989, it wasn't until almost 10 years later in 1998 when the first state actually sanctioned girls wrestling as a high school sport. And it took nearly 20 years for that to grow to 6 states that you see in purple on the map. It took actually from 2018 to 2020 for another 13 states to add official championships for girls. And then there are already 9 additional state athletic associations that have committed to have girls wrestling for the 2021 or 2022 seasons. So in all, we are expected to have at least 28 states with sanctioned girls wrestling by 2022. And on my legend, there looks like there's a gap in that 2015 to 2018 timeframe, but actually a lot happened during that time. For some of these states, their proposals to offer girls sanctioned wrestling in the high schools actually took that whole time, and they had multiple iterations of their proposals to get to this point. For other states, it was actually really straightforward. They added girls divisions in the regular season, they added girls divisions at their high school state tournament, and just move forward that way. I want to highlight a few of the changes that I think are significant from this time frame that don't show up on the map. In 2015, Iowa USA Wrestling started adding girls divisions at folk style and freestyle tournaments for the state. It was outside of school, but it was still a change that I think has made a difference in our participation and interest from women in the sport. We designed also the Iowa USA Wrestling logo, which was built off of the USA Wrestling logo that is internationally recognized, but also built in some elements from our Female Elite Wrestling logo that we had decided were a priority. So we ended up being the first state in the nation to actually add an outline or integrate an outline of female bodies rather than just adding ponytails or changing the hair on the standard silhouette. In 2016, USA Wrestling also introduced their High School Wrestling Development Committee, and co-chairs Joan Fulp and Andrea Yamamoto have been working with grassroots advocates, coaches, and leaders, at that point shifting the focus from USA Wrestling primarily being focused on growing the sport outside of school to now having leaders and liaisons supporting girls wrestling in the interscholastic system. So interscholastic wrestling is folk style wrestling, and the international opportunities that USA Wrestling has are freestyle. So let's talk just a little bit about the differences. So folk style is a national style, and the rules are written and updated annually by the National Federation of High School Sports. The NCAA also has a folk style rule book, and that's because men's wrestling at the collegiate level is folk style wrestling. It's, again, United States rules developed and modified here. Hopefully, in the near future, USA Wrestling won't be the only ones using those freestyle rules. NCAA has recently approved women's wrestling as an emerging sport, and we anticipate that will be freestyle, just like the current WCWA and NAIA wrestling is. So wrestling is that Olympic style of wrestling. The rules are updated and made by United World Wrestling, and those rules govern all international competition. And again, they also govern women's collegiate wrestling currently in the United States and have for many years. So when we are trying to pay attention to this time frame and the landscape, we're really looking at both keeping an eye on what's changing at the high school and collegiate level. That means that we're looking at both freestyle and folk style and keeping an eye on that wrestling landscape. So when rules change in both those worlds, it does matter for the development of female wrestlers in our state and across the nation. So I mentioned before that Andrea Yamamoto and Joan Fulp are our liaisons and co-chairs of the USA Wrestling Girls High School Development Committee. Now, that's their work starting in 2016 was pretty phenomenal, and we'll see a lot of that referenced in my presentation today. But the other fantastic thing from 2016 is that Helen Maroulis won an Olympic gold medal against Yoshida, who actually was a 13, I believe, time world and Olympic gold medalist. So it was a pretty significant accomplishment, and also happened during in that time frame that it looks like a little nothing happened on the calendar or on this momentum map, but we really did see some pretty phenomenal changes during that time. In their report on participation data, the development committee shares this graphic on 3-year growth. Iowa made the list. In 2018, we had 96 girls. It almost doubled the next season and then tripled this season. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about how we progressed over that time. In winter 2016, I was working with Joan and Andrea on a status update. And honestly, I was a little bummed because our participation numbers were holding steady. They were holding steady in the 90s, and they'd been there for about 3 years, which was a nice improvement from where they were the 3 years before that, but they weren't jumping up like we had hoped. So at the time, that season, just before this chart started, we had this exciting change. So the Iowa Wrestling Coaches and Officials Association contacted me, and Few and former Hawkeye Terry Steiner, who's the USA Wrestling Women's National Coach, teamed up to provide resources for IWCOA for a meeting. They had set up a meeting with IHSA Executive Director Alan Bestie, the new Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union Executive Director Jean Berger, and they went in with data from both of us looking to support their request, which I wish I could say this story had a happy ending, but as they say, this is not that kind of story. So what happened was January 2017, the IWCOA made a request to add a girls division to the Iowa High School State Athletic Tournament for wrestling, and it crashed and burned. So Few provided state participation data and a perspective on growth. USA Wrestling crafted a resolution supporting sanctioning in every state, and the IWCOA proposed a small change to each session of the state tournament that would make the event inclusive. The approach, if you build it, they will come, was working in other states, but according to the executives here, it wasn't going to work in Iowa. So we decided to stay informal and to build it anyway. In 2017-2018 season, we approached 2 schools to add a girls division to their JV tournaments. You'll remember from the chart that 96 girls were wrestling in Iowa schools that year. With short notice and the social media version of word of mouth, Few marketed the events to every high school girl we knew. They marketed the events to every high school girl they knew. And 2 weekends in a row, Ogden and Independence offered girls a chance to wrestle girls. About 10 of the 96 wrestlers showed up. In 2018-2019 season, a dozen schools added girls divisions to their tournament, and the IHSAA did the heavy lifting on communication with schools. IWCOA spread the word through their meetings, but if you look at our momentum map, Iowa was still white on that graphic. That means that they did not have any opportunities available for girls in the high school season to earn a state championship. In December, that changed. We moved into that yellow category on the map, the yellow category being states that have an unofficial championship available for their girls. So I was inspired by actually an announcement that came out of Michigan over winter break, and was able to pull together support for Iowa's first unofficial high school girls championship. So just 1 month later, nearly half of the 189 girls, female wrestlers, braved the weather to compete at the first IWCOA state championships. This past season, more than 300 took the mats for the second year IWCOA state tournament. So 2 seasons of unofficial championships really fueled record participation for us, and schools started recruiting girls. So if we go back to our map and look at it, we see that Iowa then has changed over into that yellow category. And moving forward, I don't have time to really talk about all of the exciting things that have happened and get you connected, but there'll be a slide later in the deck that has more history in the notes. The One Courageous Girl is a nice link again from USA Wrestling's Development Committee with information about that version where there's just one girl, it's not a whole team, but those are our trailblazers, right? So short version is in 2016 when 2 female wrestlers were taking the mat for a varsity match, it was big news, and honestly we thought that that might be the first time that that happened. And truth be told, in 2011, when my daughter and Cassie Herkelman planned to wrestle, we also thought it might be the first one. That match didn't happen, and I'll explain quickly a little rule that you might want to know about wrestling. When you weigh in, you can weigh in for a tournament and a duel and compete at your weight class or one weight class up. Jasmine and Cassie were one weight class apart. The plan was, let's get this varsity head-to-head match by having Jasmine move up a weight class to compete with Cassie. And when Cassie didn't make weight, then our options went away because Jasmine couldn't bump up 2 weight classes to compete. And anyway, it would not at all have been the first time that 2 girls wrestled a varsity match in Iowa. Turns out, Atina Bibbs of Davenport had actually won Iowa's first all-girl varsity match in 1993, before any of the rest of those girls were even born. She also won Women's Freestyle Nationals. And remember I said the senior open level? That was a freestyle tournament with all age groups. So senior level national champ right here in Iowa in 1993. And Atina isn't the only Iowa high school wrestler to make waves at the open level. In 2016, when the Olympic trials were held at Carver Hawkeye Arena, Rachel Waters of Ankeny was the youngest competitor to qualify and compete in the event. So far at every level, it seems like if you build it, they will come. And that seems to be working in wrestling, even if you build it unofficially. So more and more schools are starting to have one girl show up for their practices, for their team. And several schools in Iowa have started to have teams of girls with their own practice times, basically small group lessons for girls that are new to the sport. And some offer a modified practice schedule with just a few days a week, which works for their multi-sport athletes and also for students with jobs. They build a shortened schedule that starts in November with the regular season and ends with the IWCOA State Championship in mid-January. So it's a real short season. There's not a lot of time to make those messages stick, but there's a great opportunity for some physical learning and a lot of energy around supporting the team and representing the school. So with all these gutsy girls showing up, now we have a shortage of coaches to support them. So all throughout the season last year, I had coaches contacting me saying, hey, do you know any female coaches that would be interested in helping my team? And since Denver High School got Cassie and William Penn University got Rachel, and Jasmine's off doing her clinical rotations, it's time for us to really start thinking outside the box, which is why I'm very glad you're here. I'm glad you're here because wrestling needs help, like actual manpower help. We have this tremendous culture of history that teaches valuable combat and self-defense skills, but we don't actually have a progressive physical literacy program so that people feel confident and ready to teach this kind of thing in their schools. We don't have a plan to teach wrestling basics to adolescents who aren't experienced moving their bodies in different directions, kind of head down necessarily, and really interacting with the ground. So we have training traditions also in place in wrestling, in our wrestling rooms, that start in kindergarten, burn people out by junior high. And we know how to work out and embrace the grind, but we're just getting started talking about how to fuel and hydrate young women's bodies for those that want to manage their weight for competition and also have strong bones, reproductive health, and practices that support their mental well-being. So I'm glad you're here. This is my first virtual conference, and I hope to be able to connect with you guys and set up a poll and answer your questions during it. But if I were face-to-face, I would really want to raise a hand to show me who already teaches self-defense, wrestling, or other combat sports. Maybe who teaches diving, dance, cheer, or gymnastics, where we've got lots of directional change cues and experience teaching that. People who coach non-contact sports but are interested in learning some of the differences, you know, how am I going to interact in this really hands-on way? Or maybe you don't coach now at all, but you were a former wrestling manager and you want to help out. No matter what your skills and background, there are things you can do to help girls wrestling in Iowa, to help girls self-defense in Iowa, to help girls physical literacy in Iowa, and really to just create more opportunities in your school. I'm hopeful that a few of you will really dive in on some of these online resources. So the one in the middle is what Female Elite Wrestling calls our welcome kit. We actually integrate the Wrestler's Playbook, which you see on the left, into that free kit. It's an ebook, it's $5 online. We include it for free in our welcome kit, which is available to any middle school, high school girls, as long as you're not publishing it out there with their proprietary information. You can share it with your teams, and we're happy to share it with you. The new seasons isn't built yet because we really do include on the second page the schedule. So once we know what schools are offering girls divisions, what those dates and locations are, we include that in the welcome kit, because maybe middle school girls want to go and watch. Or you find this an easy way to get parents the information about your schedule and let them know which events you're going to be going to. The other images that I put on here, Wrestle Like a Girl is a history book, and it's still available in print right now, and will be an Audible book for the second edition. But if you could get a hard copy and get that into your school's library, I think that'd be fantastic. Roar is not a wrestling book. It's a book about women's health, performance, and nutrition. Gender and Competition is just what you would think in terms of how they're looking at information, but it's less an instruction manual on how to coach all girls and more an exploration of team dynamics and how some of that changes. Like I said, particularly in a combat sport or a one-on-one competition sport that also has a team dynamic to it. We think about the curves of competitive behaviors. They overlap, of course. So there are boys and girls, men and women in both sort of parts of the competitive spectrum for a more social, team-based versus a more hierarchical approach. And we see some overlap. So if you're used to coaching girls who are in more of a team-based sport, you might see some of these girls come in with 8 years of wrestling experience, and they're used to being on a boys team. And so they may have integrated some of that culture, but they're all students, right? They all have different learning needs, they all have different communication styles, and the more you can speak to both elements of that range, the better off you'll be. So when we're looking at the dynamics on coaching a primarily female team, that might be very different for someone who's used to coaching wrestling, or someone who's used to coaching girls in a different structure. I did try to find resources specifically for physical education and wrestling, and so there are links included to these two documents, and I'm going to move on, though, to the USA Wrestling core documents. So some of you may never step in a wrestling room, and that's okay, because there are lots of ways to contribute to the health and education of females who might wrestle in your school. Maybe you're sitting in class and you notice this girl who usually is bubbly and energetic, but today looks completely drained, maybe doesn't look like she's feeling all that well. So being able to access maybe this coach's education content that includes nutrition, sports nutrition, psychology, those sorts of things might be links that you find useful. But if you're actually looking for core curriculum information, there is a lot available for you at the USA Wrestling website. And it's broken up into sections with that curriculum being built around different options. So we've got folk style. When it says Olympic style, that means those things will be helpful for freestyle and for Greco. What I included for you here were some direct links to the section on the folk style level 1 curriculum. Some of those videos are just like 30 seconds or a minute and a half long. Like, how do I get them into their stance? What cues am I giving for where their head is aligned over their shoulders and the hips? That athletic stance is really similar to a lot of other athletic stances, but this one needs to be prepared for you to be shoved and knocked around and to move your feet without crossing your feet and those sorts of things. Also, when you're trying to be in wrestling stance and you're trying to be in that lower level, your legs are going to get tired. Again, we want to be fueling and hydrating for these workouts that people aren't necessarily used to. On the spot where I shared must-see movement on bottom for girls. That's not the label of it on the website. It says that it's, parterre defense. But what it is really, again, that opportunity for you to see how the body moves down on the ground, practicing moving different directions, shifting your weight, where do you look, how do you move around on the mat, really getting people comfortable scooting, leaning, and doing all the things that you need to do in order to be able to maintain control of your body when someone else is trying to turn you. So I think those are great skills to include in your warm-up and cool-down routines. So particularly warm-up for those. I really do also like, again, mind-body work, partner stretches, focus on relaxation, and those sorts of things. So lots of good resources from the USA Wrestling website for those of you who are interested. Now, again, those rules are made by the folks at, they're made by the NFHS. If I could, I would have provided you with a simple 6 or 8 week, 2 to 3 practice a week lesson plan for girls. That Folk Style website, that Freestyle website, they each had a PDF document with sample lesson plans, and you can certainly still go there and borrow those videos. But those videos are older, and because they're older, they're mostly males. I was fortunate enough to have the USA Wrestling Women's Curriculum from 2017 to 2018. I included the bookends for that 21-week curriculum here just as an example, and I will be making some connections with USA to figure out how best to get this content where it's accessible to you. I don't know if they'll be added on the USA Wrestling Girls website or if it will end up with a modified version on Fuse website. But when we look at it, what I love about it is that it had mental, nutrition, physical, it had coaches' goals. And if you click on each of those pictures, there are actually links to the USA Wrestling Women's Instagram page where there are videos. And not all of these videos, because this is freestyle, right? Not all of them work well for your high school season in terms of valid techniques that you need to know, but some of them are great. So like on this page in particular, the drop and drive single, repenetration, if I forget to say it later, if you aren't recruiting people who have an interest in physics, you're missing the boat, because a lot of the instruction for this makes a lot of sense once you figure out the physics of it. If you are going to step into a wrestling room, or if you're going to choose to be one of the people who volunteers to chaperone and take a female athlete to one of the girls' divisions on the schedule while the varsity's somewhere else, you're probably going to want to know what the refs are talking about. So the NFHS has a free officiating wrestling education offering in their online learning. They have a $50 coaching wrestling course. The other thing that NFHS has, and I included a link here, are some major changes in terms of the 2021 season. So each year we get a new rule book, we get an updated file with our rules updates and points of emphasis, but this was just a press release, and I love it because what it was announcing was that they were changing the hair cover rule. So first things first, we were excited last year when they made it so that not everybody who had hair that touched their eyebrows, hair that touched their ears, or hair that touched their collar had to wear this silly hair cover. There was at least some ways now new to the rule book last year where you could get your hair up and out of the way, have it not touching, and be able to compete without a hair cover. Before that, what you can see in the other picture is my daughter wrestling blind, because while there were rules that said if your headgear fell off and there was an opportunity, a break in the action, the officials would give you time to get that back on to protect your ears. But there wasn't really a rule that said, hey, if you happen to be blind because your hair cover slipped down, We don't know what to do with that. So we're super excited that the hair cover rule is now gone. They are no longer policing hair, except to say that if you have like braids in and there's metal hardware on your hair ties, then you do need to protect still. So you may still have some folks who need to have hair covers, and I still have a few of those, but for the most part, hopefully the new rules will have us not needing to fuss with that as part of our competitive gear prep. The other big rule that we will not miss was one that required the athletes to weigh in their underclothes, which made it so the boys and girls ended up having to weigh in separately. If you've been around wrestling enough to know that it used to not even include their underwear, yeah, we thought it was progress when they went from not wearing them to wearing them for the weigh-ins, but now they'll be weighing in their competition singlet, which means you can host one weigh-in with the whole team, and I think it's safer for both the athletes and the people who are supervising the weigh-ins. So big exciting changes for this year. If I were an Iowan looking for good information about wrestling, I would go to the IHSAA website. And another side note here, when you talk to your school about what they're doing with girls wrestling, some schools will consider the girls a club sport. They will consider it just like anything else that isn't sanctioned by the IGHSAU. The reality is, these girls are actually more like the girls who go out for the football team. It's an IHSAA existing sport, and there are rules, and we have to follow those rules. So unless the IHSAA has informed you otherwise, your club is going to be functioning using the IHSAA rules for wrestling. They will have an updated rules meeting. You can attend in person at the IWCOA Coaches Convention if we have one this fall, or you can do the rules meeting online. They keep lots of good resources here. The 2020 grooming rule is the one that I would say isn't up to date because of all the exciting changes, but this is a spot for you to go and look for information relevant to the Iowa high school season in particular, and the interpretation of rules that the officials will be having their eyes out for the season. So we've come a long way in the last few years, but we're also just getting started with our shift in focus from just trying to get girls into the wrestling room and making sure that those rooms are inclusive and welcoming to them, to now really trying to look at what can we do to make all the rules in wrestling inclusive. So we need to strengthen our coaches' curriculum. We need to pull together some of those resources and put them together, align them for what wrestling needs next, which includes materials for coaches, officials, athletes who didn't grow up wrestling. So we need physical literacy taught more universally in our schools so that all students can become proficient in what some would call the applied skills of getting up from the ground when they've been knocked down, or manipulating someone's hands to make space to escape a bad situation. Because of the discomfort that I have around risk, I want to make sure that we're really not just walking in blind to the wrestling room and saying, you know, we'll just do whatever. Schools are uncomfortable with risk. You know, gymnastics was eliminated from the schools a long time ago. You know, we have to think about, where then do kids get those skills to skillfully interact with the ground? As a physical therapist, I teach adults how to fall safely, and oftentimes they have never been taught to fall, or they haven't practiced rolling since the 3rd grade. And since more than 90% of the girls that will show up for your school's wrestling team will be new to the sport, I think it's important to start by teaching them how to fall safely and roll before we teach them the important life skills of how to throw and knock people down. Since our coaches' curriculum doesn't include that for USA Wrestling, but martial arts typically do, I reached out to Courtney Koch of Hard Drive Performance Center out of Cedar Rapids, and she recorded several videos for us. So able to have an introduction, some forward falls, some back falls, some side falls, and I will get all of those uploaded right now. 2 of them are included in the presentation for you. So when all else fails, phone a friend, and we'll just keep moving forward. In terms of planning, hopefully at this point I've got your gears going a little bit, and we're excited about looking at what might this be like for your school. And I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I will show you that there are a few links. Starting a girls' high school wrestling program is actually an entire document that I cannot take credit for. Again, it is from the USA Wrestling High School Development Committee, and you're going to want to take a look at it. But I wanted to highlight just this one slide because I think it says so much. It asks if you knew the school was going to start a girls' wrestling team, that there were going to be weight classes available from everywhere from 100 pounds to more than 200 pounds, really inviting all students to come try it out. Did you know that women's wrestling is a collegiate and Olympic sport? And which competitive uniform would you like to wear to represent your school? Uniforms matter. And so the second section I included on here, what will we wear? When we first started offering girls divisions, there were a few girls like the one on the left who had wrestled at the national level and invested in owning their own women's cut singlet, high cut through the neck, high cut through the armpits. Most of the girls didn't have that option, so they would wear a boy's singlet with something under it, sometimes a compression shirt, sometimes just their sports bra. But when you're young and adorable and just show up to wrestle like this little one did, it's no problem. When we get into older, more developed bodies, what we notice is, nobody really wants to be the one policing the sports bra. Like, does that come up high enough? If not, what are we going to do on short notice? So when Female Elite Wrestling started offering tournaments and offering gear, we really moved toward making women's cut singlets accessible. When my daughter was in high school, we just made what were called copycat singlets. She was the one girl, and so we made singlets that looked just like the school's singlet, but were in a women's cut. And it was exciting the first time the school called and said, hey, we've got girls out for the team. Can we borrow those West High singlets? But a couple years ago, NFHS actually approved a 2-piece singlet. And when Denver put together their team on super short notice, I'm suspecting these uniforms were already in their school supplies. So if your school's looking at, next season's uniforms, if you have a 2-piece singlet option, as long as the legs are cut long enough and it's not riding up, that may be an option that makes it available for both genders, and maybe even people who aren't used to wearing a singlet would like that option. In terms of making coaches connections, just a real quick link, no particular order here. Sorry about not even getting it into alphabetical, but a couple of high school coaches that are willing to share their information with anyone who might see this and have questions about how they are leading and growing their wrestling teams. And then also the guys who coach Guts and Laces, so the freestyle coaches at the colleges in Iowa. Waldorf University has had a program for 10 years. Grandview just finished their first season, and over the next 2 seasons we'll be seeing Iowa Wesleyan, Indian Hills, and William Penn University adding their women's program. So it was super exciting times. I think maybe I didn't mention it earlier, but over this time frame, that gap right in the map, we went from about 30 programs to more than 80 programs with women's collegiate wrestling. And like I said, it now became just this year an NCAA emerging sport for women. When it comes to building a schedule, you cannot make a plan that is going to work for everyone. We have maybe 90% or more of the girls are going to show up just new, ready to learn. They need a good teacher, they need good partners, they need to be taught how to be good partners, and they're there for the experience with no other experience from wrestling outside of school. Then there are going to be girls who maybe are, 3-time national champions already. They've got experience, they need well-matched partners. and they're potentially not going to care about the gender. In fact, they've been training with boys at the club level and for a long time. So you don't really go in thinking, I'm going to have this one option. These athletes are technically joining your existing team and will, whether it's a separate practice, like I think Osage, for example, had a couple of girls who had been on the team before they started their girls practices, and so those girls would go to regular practice in the afternoon and then also help out in the morning. So the more experienced athletes were helping the newer athletes as part of that process. Have fun, right? Girls want to be on a team that works hard, has fun, feels connected, not just connected to each other, but also connected to your middle school JV, to your program, to your varsity. They will learn a lot. They will ask a lot of questions. They will show team spirit. They enjoy some team meals. We can use those as an opportunity to teach about, how hydration matters, how salt intake matters, how we do need carbs when we're fueling for certain kinds of workouts, and they want to win. So don't underestimate their competitiveness. When I first started advertising, marketing, recruiting for Iowa USA Wrestling for Girls, again, I told you a few made their logo first. This one was kind of a work in progress. I was trying to get it out on short notice, and our artist drew exactly how to break your wrist, dislocate your elbow, and tear your rotator cuff. If you go back and watch the videos from Courtney, she'll talk to you about not doing those things. But this early draft really was about getting how to reach us out there, and it was marketing to girls who already wrestled, letting them know they now finally had an option to wrestle girls. So you can use this kind of logo when you're marketing to girls that are going to automatically picture themselves as the girl in the red, right? When you're marketing for a new team and you're trying to get people to experience the sport who haven't been involved in the past, this is better graphic, right? You want to show what it looks like to be strong, independent, but part of a team, right? Fun, fitness, how to be good partners. If only one girl shows up, maybe she can bring a friend. Be prepared to answer questions for parents. Think about safety, both while you're actually executing the practices, but also like the really benefits from a self-defense standpoint that will help girls stick with it, even if they're not winning on the mat. The resources that I have here are, I'm not going to read them to you, but each of the links has something that you may find beneficial. The paper one, there is a connection to the Wrestle Like a Girl website, and it's their coaches page, and they have a great graphic where it's ready to fill in. Maybe you could use it for your informational meeting for the girls, welcoming them to wrestling team meeting. In the digital options, LuchaFit is a really key resource for us there because they've got options with blogs and videos, everything from how to manage your period on a tournament day to, essential practice elements, things to think about when you're what you're going to wear, what your focus is, things that can kind of get in your head when you thought maybe that this was going to be a different experience than it was. The community section, I included a link to the FEW website. We hope to put some more resources available there for you and have you be able to come back. And then under culture, really the culture of women's wrestling is strong and at all age group levels through the USA Wrestling Development Program. And so all of the links and opportunities that we share later are also on that page. We really want to look at how do we use celebrating achievements for our students as its own public awareness and advocacy. People need to know about your opportunities and what the girls are doing and celebrate those little things like maybe having an IWCOA state tournament fan shirt and team shirt. Something that, if you think about it late in the season, might be hard to get pulled together, but if you plan ahead, would be able to make the girls feel special in the middle of January when things are all busy. In the more great resources section, there's lots of good stuff, some of which we haven't touched on, but Good to Go really is looking at recovery, nutrition. That one is wrestling specific, though not specific to women. The UWW and USA Wrestling warm-up program has some good options, and there's video of Coach Terry Steiner talking about the differences between coaching men and women, and then a lot, again, of those resources from USA Wrestling's Development Committee. We've looked at a few of those. We need to be thinking about health, though, right? So the female athlete triad is real. Low energy availability is a problem. Eating disorders do affect our young women differently, proportionally than it does to men. And the nice thing about the high school girls season is most of the time, if they're at a tournament they're building those brackets based on who showed up. So we're going to cluster some girls together that were close in weight rather than making them hit weight targets all season long. They can do that if they wrestle at the Battle of Waterloo. They can wrestle in a weight class there because it's competition as a team. If you set up a dual team tournament, then they will need to make their weights, and then they will need to make weight at the IWCOA tournament. But other than that, they could be working in groupings and not really focusing on weight management. I did include some other links of things like the weight classes that other states use, some nice news and information about some of our other girls, and ultimately the information, some of it you've seen, some of it you haven't, but it's time, I think. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. Please reach out if you have questions. Again, when you go through those slides, there's lots of information out there. I have a wish list and am happy to share ideas. I'm happy to learn from you. PE is not what I teach, right? I'm a physical therapist. I work with folks one-on-one. I don't have to navigate the groups. I do love each year when I get to train national training camp and the girls come in and they're like, are we going to do yoga again? What day are we doing Tai Chi? Are we doing Headspace or Calm when it's time to get our minds right? And so really looking at ways all of those things come together is something that I'm looking forward to and always open to feedback. So again, thank you for your time and for your interest in supporting the girls in your school.